Kei aku nui, kei aku rahi, rarau mai, tahuti mai. Welcome to Mata with me, Mihingarangi Forbes, brought to you by Te Māngai, Pāho and Irirangi Te Motu, New Zealand on air. Today we have an extended interview with the Minister for Māori Development, Conservation and Te Arawhiti, Tama Potaka. Tēnā koe te tūngani. Well, it's been over 6 months since you've been elected. Give me your personal report card out of 10.
Well, first of all, kia ora, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou katoa me tō whānau, tō pāhara keke. Look, it's an absolute privilege to be part of Christopher Luxon's cabinet and to be part of this coalition government. There have been some challenges. I think we're progressing the priorities that I've announced to the Prime Minister, and we're progressing them in a material way. There's more work to be done, but some of the target areas that the government has established, the 9 government targets, obviously I'm responsible for one of them around emergency housing. I think that's going very well, but it's early days. Blue shoots is how I describe it, very early days, and there's more work to do.
I guess Te iwi Māori would like to know, you know, you're saying there's been some achievements across the coalition, but what about your achievements? What are you proud of?
Well, I think I'm very proud of the mahi that I've undertaken alongside Nicola Willis to support some very important choices that have been made in the budget. For example, the tautoko that's been given to literally hundreds of thousands of whānau Māori through tax relief. I think that's a magnificent effort by this coalition government to recognise that the money that whānau Māori earn by way of wages and salaries actually stays in their pockets and isn't gobbled up by the government. That's in the form of tax relief. Te Matatini is another example where I think collaboration with the Maniputia, Minister Willis and others of the coalition government to demonstrate that we are very supportive of te reo and tikanga kaupapa.
When you talk about the tax cuts, they are focused at the squeezed middle. Do you think Māori occupy much of the squeezed middle?
I think disproportionately Māori occupy a different space along the spectrum, but my understanding and certainly my advice is that 75% of Māori over 15 will get some form of tax relief, and I'm very proud of that.
Let's talk about the fast track, because it's on everybody's mind at the moment. The fast track bill, you're a supporter?
Yes, I'm a supporter of the one-stop shop initiative. That was part of our coalition agreement with New Zealand First and the National Party. But importantly, I'm supportive of the notion of trying to make it a little bit more expeditious to deliver major infrastructure projects of regional and national significance, whatever those might be. Now, we do need to make sure that there are appropriate balancing considerations, particularly with my role as the Minister of Conservation and also the Minister of Māori Crown Relations. And there are some provisions within the proposed legislation that I think go some way to enabling a balancing of those various considerations.
When you say a balancing of considerations, do you mean engagement, input or decision making?
I think it's both. I think that there are process issues that have been inserted, or process provisions that have been inserted to ensure that both ministers and others are engaged in assessment of applications, to ensure that there's an optimal composition of the panels, to ensure that the Minister of Māori Development and the Minister of Māori Crown Relations and Conservation have opportunities to engage through those processes. And certainly the current draft bill has attracted a lot of attention. I think it might be nearly 40,000 submissions have been made. So it's generated a lot of interest and concerns that have been shared with me on the various attendances that are made throughout the country, whether it's conservation or infrastructure or marae hapu iwi. There's a lot of concern, but there's also a lot of hope that we can get things done in a more expeditious fashion, albeit making sure it's the right balance.
So let me get this right. You're saying that the balancing act is that you will be involved, and the Minister for Conservation and Infrastructure will also be involved. But that's really in lieu of the public being involved, isn't it? Because under this proposed bill, there is no public consultation or councils or regional councils having their involvement, and that's really what the concern of Māori is that ultimately at the end of the day 3 ministers get to decide. Is that rangatiratanga?
Well, the first thing is that rangatiratanga doesn't come out of a piece of legislation. Rangatiratanga predates
Rangatiratanga comes out of the treaty, and the treaty promises Māori in their rohe to have rangatiratanga over their whenua and their taonga katoa. So my question is, this process, the fast track, is that rangatiratanga for Māori?
No. What I'd start with saying is that rangatiratanga is affirmed by the treaty. It doesn't come out of the treaty, and those things predate the treaty, and that notion of rangatiratanga, mana motuhake and other things predates the treaty. And the treaty and other documents have affirmed it. The second thing is that you take someone who wants to go through an application through the fast track process as it's currently drafted, the expectation is that they will go out and engage with iwi and with other Māori groups who are involved in the area or the piece of land or the resource that's proposed to be the subject of a fast track application. So right from the get-go, the expectation and it's announced very well through the proposed legislation, is that there will be engagement on the ground between any proposed applicant and whānau, hapu, iwi, who occupy that area or who are part of that area.
What might that look like? A mining company that wants to come in and quarry somebody's tupuna maunga, what are the rules around having to engage with iwi?
I think the bill observes that or requires that there'd be some engagement. People will not just an email, but people will go and talk. Proposed applicants will go and talk with the relevant iwi and hapu who are from that location to identify what the content of the proposed application happens to be. Now, I think that there are a number of areas through the legislation. There's been some significant concern that's been expressed. For example, 3 ministers making decisions, but I think we've also seen Manu Pihopa, Minister Chris Bishop, has also observed along the way that maybe that's something that can be looked into, come out of the select committee process, and there'll be decisions made as to how the decision making actually takes place, and there might be other options for that.
Would you support different rules around the decision making, not just the 3 ministers?
Well, I think that we're waiting to get the full feedback from the select committee, and that matter will be taken into a discussion and ultimately a cabinet discussion. But also should be noted along the way that the current proposed legislation enables concession decisions that need to be made ordinarily by the Minister of Conservation to continue down that pathway.
Just back to the notion of the idea actually that you talked about, how iwi will be considered and talked to and spoken to by potential groups that want to, do a project under the fast track. Are there going to be rules around that? Will iwi, if they decide, actually, we don't really want you to come in and mine our maunga, would that be a consideration? Would they be able to stop the process?
Well, I think that there are a number of touch points around the content or the outcome of those types of kōrero, noting also that there is a very clear expectation in the coalition agreements and also through this legislation that settlements that have been undertaken will be upheld and will be basically followed. So I think there's a number of issues that we've described here. I don't want to conflate every single issue together into one answer, but to note that the panel, the Minister of Māori Development and others would take a very keen interest into understanding what is the content, what is the outcome of those kōrero between a proposed applicant and iwi and hapu, notwithstanding the fact that many, I think, iwi and hapu will be applicants in the process because they too want to see some of our iwi tribally led projects advanced in an expeditious manner.
With your former iwi leader's hat on, do you see any potential for new treaty breaches?
I think there's been some concerns that have been outlined through the select committee process of the potential for treaty breaches. I do not hope that that is the case. That's why we've been very clear around our commitment to uphold treaty settlements through the process. But there may be others who have not settled yet, or other breaches that potential breaches that may be discussed.
Because you say that the Treaty of Waitangi affirms rangatiratanga of rangatira over their land. So if Māori aren't able to have rangatiratanga during this, through a fast track process, potentially that's going to lead to another treaty claim.
Yeah, no, I think what we've seen over many, many years is that there have been actions taken through these types of processes and through other decisions that have been made by the executive and ultimately the legislature and the Crown that have given rise to allegations of treaty breaches and actually findings in that manner. But for me, certainly the idea of the notion of a one-stop shop that expedites regional and nationally significant projects, that has the appropriate weighting and consideration of a variety of issues is needed right now because it's become very hard to get a lot of important projects underway and completed.
It's not the first time we've done fast track or enabling bills.
There was a fast track COVID-19
That's right.
pathway as well. And this one-stop shop approach is modelled on that, but with a whole range of other additional measures.
You are Ngāti Whitikaupeka.
Yes.
Your treaty settlement is in the name of your tūpuna Utaku Potaka.
Yes. Ngāti Hauti as well.
In that settlement, the Potaka whānau claims that the Crown, through a fast-track process called the Enabling Act, created the Moa Dam.
Yes.
As a result, your whānau claim during the construction of that dam on your awa, the power company failed to engage with your iwi, and it resulted in significant environmental changes to the river. It impacted the fish species, created river channels and the rest of it. What makes this fast-track process any different from the last fast-track process that created the dam on your awa and ultimately led to your whānau's treaty claim?
Yes, so the Mōwhango Dam, which is currently up on what we call Defence Force lands, Ngāti Whitikaupeka, Tama Potaka and also Ngāti Hauti have interests in that area alongside our whanaunga from Ngāti Tuwharetoa and Ngāti Rangi. And certainly there was enabling legislation that enabled that to happen. There are some.
It was a fast-track process.
Yeah, it was definitely enabling legislation. I do think in those days there was far less understanding and awareness of the genuine concerns and responsibilities we have under that rubric of rangatiratanga around how iwi, hapu, whānau, Māori have interests and responsibilities for land. I think the context has changed dramatically. That legislation did not have the same degree or extent of provisioning around the expected engagement and content of decision makings as this one does. So I think there are differences. And
Does it though?
Well,
tell me what they are. Where do iwi get to say, actually, no, we're not actually going to support that on our awa or on our maunga?
Well, I don't think there was an expectation through that legislation that enabled places like the Mōwhango Dam to be established that any applicant for a project would engage with local hapu and iwi prior to that project being proposed through the relevant regulatory process. In this proposed legislation for the one-stop shop, there is. So even at that basic level...
But I'm asking you, what are the rules around it, and are iwi able to push back, and if they do, does that have any mana?
Well, I think throughout the current proposed fast-track Consenting Act, there are various steps and various touch points where it's expected that iwi and hapu...
But you can't tell me what the rules are. You can't be clear with us to say that actually if iwi object to a mine or a quarry or whatever on their whenua, on their tupuna maunga or in their awa, that they are going to, that their decision or their opposition to it is going to hold any mana.
No, I don't think that this government is in a space where people have a veto right over the advancement of projects at any stage of that project, but where we're at is that we expect that a lot of iwi and hapu will have their own projects that they want to advance, that there are some provisions, and may not be optimal for all people, there are some provisions in the currently proposed legislation to advance projects and make sure that there is proper engagement along the way. Under the legislation that established the Mōwhango Dam, there wasn't any of that provisioning.
So you think they're different? You think the Enabling Act that established the dam and this fast track are different? You think that iwi are going to have more rights?
No, yes I do. That enabling legislation from many decades ago did not have the same level or context awareness of the responsibilities of iwi and hapu going through those regulatory processes. This one does, and again I'd reiterate that we do want to get things moving in the country and get the economy back on track, and in order to do that we need to have enabling legislation like what we have proposed. There may be some changes to be made, and of course the Ministers and Cabinet are open to discussions.
Ka pai. Still a little bit on the fast track. Recently in a response to the fast track you said saving every species was aspirational and couldn't be achieved. Your statement upset many, particularly environmentalists. What was your statement based on? Why can't we attempt to save every species?
No, I think that the Department of Conservation and actually a lot of public, private, philanthropic and community entities are doing their very best to save species throughout the country, and I certainly know from my own personal experience, being in this role for a few months, seeing the diligence and the professionalism of the team at the Department of Conservation to work with others. Great projects around the country like Te Kotahitanga o Te Taio down at Te Taio Wildere or Abel Tasman National Park, and Project Maunga down at Taranaki Maunga. You've seen a real enthusiasm to save and move species from a threatened and at-risk space into a persisting space. And we're talking about 4,500 species, a lot of species of the 80,000 native species that we have in the country that are either threatened or at risk.
So are you committed to saving every species or not?
We're committing to doing our very best, and I am too, and I encourage the Department of Conservation to team members, Penny Nelson and others at Te Papa to do their level best to do that. We do operate within fiscal parameters and fiscal responsibility, and certainly the budget that we have at the Department of Conservation, nigh on $700 million, is 0.44 or 0.45% of the total budget to look after 30% of all the land and resources in New Zealand, and in addition to that, some of the marine space. So we are stretched thin.
But it's a decision at the end of the day, and it's a financial decision, because you're spending $2.9 billion on tax deductibility for landlords and $3.7 billion a year on tax cuts. You could instead spend $6 billion on saving our unique flora and fauna.
Yeah, I think there are choices that have been made by successive governments over time, and certainly my advocacy for the taiao within Cabinet and across my colleagues, but particularly with our Manu Pūtea, Minister Willis, is to make sure that we have the appropriate resources dedicated to what we need to do within the Department of Conservation and across other departments, because it's not just Te Papa that does work in this space, in the environmental space, the Ministry for the Environment, there's Ministry of Primary Industries and others too. But certainly from my perspective, the priority to make sure we know where is high conservation area, what can we do in order to do that, and we go through processes for other areas within the DOC estate that have more commercial incentives, like, for example, the ski fields.
Ka pai. E ngā kai nui ana koe ki tō tātou reo, that's undisputable, you're a kaitiaki of te reo. Aotearoa's most esteemed te reo Māori translators have written an open letter to the government.
Yes.
Their concerns are the upcoming Treaty Principles Bill is based on a highly inaccurate translation that breaches international ethical standards of translations and risks enshrining fiction as legal fact at the heart of our nation's constitutional arrangements. So as a graduate of Panikiritanga, you will have some expertise in this area. Is it not critical when making good law that specialist experts are used to translate, particularly a document so important as Te Tiriti?
Yes, the first thing, e tautoko ana o kōrero he taonga hoki tō tātou reo. Ki au nei he tuā papa mō Aotearoa New Tirini, iwi hapu whānau, e ka kaha tautoko au I te kōrero I tō tātou reo ao pōpō ao. But te mea nei, I'm also a graduate of Whakatupuranga Ruamano in Te Tirohoi o Wanganui, alongside Te Panakiritanga and Te Aute College. So,
do you think that the translation of those three articles is inaccurate?
No, we have entered into coalition commitment, the National Party and the ACT Party, around a Treaty Principles Bill based on ACT policy to be taken forward for first reading and to the Select Committee. That's where we've said what we've said, that's what we've committed to.
But do you think that the translations are inaccurate as our mātanga reo have stated in the open letter?
I think there are various translations given to
well, there's
the
three.
treaty.
There's three, and they're in the bill, and you would have seen them.
I've not seen the bill being presented yet. No, we know that there's a draft ACT policy, and I've not seen a bill.
Do you trust the likes of Te Haumihiata, Perepi Walker, Tātiri McLeod, Stacey Morrison, as our mātanga reo, who say that they are highly inaccurate and they are worried that this is going to be a bill that is going to Parliament?
I have seen the letter, and I'm very appreciative of the letter, and expressed some very genuine concerns. In addition, the National Party and the ACT Party have an arrangement, the coalition commitment, to take a bill forward. Yeah,
except that you are the Minister of Māori Development. Wouldn't Te Iwi Māori expect you to ensure that our reo is being handled, treated, translated to the utmost quality? I mean, do you even know who translated it?
I'm not aware of who within the ACT Party has been involved in doing this work.
Will you chase that up? Is that important to you?
This is very important to me.
So
it's
will you chase it up?
Important. It's very important to me to ensure that we follow through on our coalition commitments, but we also follow through on some of the concerns, genuine concerns and legitimate concerns that our mātanga reo have raised.
If you don't find, if it continues to stay the same, those translations that our mātanga reo say are highly inaccurate, will you still support the first reading of that bill?
Oh, we are bound by coalition commitments.
But you're a reo Māori speaker, and
Yes.
you're a kaitiaki of the reo. Surely you would not support something where you know it's inaccurate.
Well, my understanding is that we will follow the coalition commitment. Now, I know there's genuine concerns, and those concerns have been and will be continued to be raised in that process.
Will you take a look at the reo?
I will continue to raise the genuine concerns of constituents and mātanga reo, such as those people who have conveyed that letter.
So you will take a look?
I will take those issues forward.
Yeah, and will that be something that you'll discuss with those who penned the letter?
Well, I've received the letter. I've only received it in the last week. It expresses genuine concerns, and those are matters that will be raised in the ongoing discussions around the bill.
Tēnā koe. So with your pōtai whare on,
whare.
Your housing
Tāhuhu.
Te tāhuhu. The definition of affordable housing is when you can buy a house based on 3 times your income. In Aotearoa, as you know, currently a house is about 6.6 times your income, so we've got a long way to go.
I think in some locations too it's much higher.
Much higher, yeah. And that it will be significantly different for Māori who are lower income earners. So Māori home ownership is about 28%, while Pākehā New Zealanders have a rate of nearly double that, 58%. Māori are 5 times more likely to be homeless than Pākehā. And plenty of them are living in Rotorua in the emergency housing that you've made some announcements around recently. So you're going to close down, you're not going to renew the consents for those motels, and by Christmas 2025 they won't be used. What is the solution?
I think the first thing to sort of reflect on is we are in a housing crisis.
Yep.
And a lot of people, disproportionately Māori and Pacifica, are doing it very tough around the tāhuhu or housing crisis that they are facing, that the country's facing. And we've got a variety of steps that we're undertaking to try and generate far greater supply at an affordable level, whether or not that's going for housing growth and some of the rules around zoning, fixing up the infrastructure funding and finance, changing the rules around tenancies and landlords, building and construction matters, and social housing. And I have some enhanced responsibilities around social housing, and particularly emergency housing.
That's right. So what have you decided in the motels in Rotorua?
Okay, so in Rotorua there's both contracted emergency motels and hotels, and also just straight out emergency hotels. There were also COVID hotels, and that's a different issue. There were 13 contracted emergency hotels in Rotorua, and it's a little bit like transitional housing, contracted emergency. It's a bit different from standard emergency. There were 13, and we have approved for 7 to be subject to a consent application going forward, and by the end of December 2025, next year, we expect that they will come down to 0. We will not need those anymore.
So where will they go?
Well, the first thing is that there is currently a lot of supply coming on through the work that's been done in the last couple of years with Kāinga and others. So there is supply coming on for whānau that need motels. For whānau that need housing.
1,500 social housing spaces that were announced by yourself and Chris Bishop. Given the Kāinga Ora announcement in recent days, are they still going to be built?
Yes. The funds that have come to be have been made available for those 1,500 homes have been committed. Now, on Rotorua, there is supply coming on where many of the folks that are living in contracted emergency hotels now will be able to populate those new houses. But don't forget, most people who leave an emergency housing situation actually go to private housing. They do not go to social housing. So, we are undertaking a variety of things to make sure that there's sufficient housing, whether it's social or private, and appropriate support for those people to move into proper housing and not be living in that social, cultural, moral catastrophe that is emergency housing.
And the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, says that the deductibility, the $2.9 billion, will help with a downward pressure on rentals. Are you expecting rentals to drop in Rotorua as they're coming out of the emergency housing? Because that's the issue, We've just seen consistently increasing rentals?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is affordable rentals, not just affordable owned houses, but also affordable rental houses. But sort of early days in terms of the emergency housing target that we have, target number 8, is that the numbers of folks living in emergency housing is going down. There is some supply coming for whānau to move in those homes, and we have to look at different alternative opportunities to create greater supply, hence all the work that Manu Pihopa, Christopher Bishop, has undertaken with our support to generate more housing. And you mentioned before that income house price ratio is very difficult to overcome, so it's incumbent upon me and other housing ministers to work very hard in this space.
Do you support what Christopher Luxon says, is that the tax deductibility for landlords will help decrease rents?
I think there's a number of different changes that we've made, and the overall impact, I think, will be a bit of movement in the rents, and preferably downward. It will put a little bit of downward pressure on that.
Are you a landlord?
Yes, I am.
How many rentals do you own?
Well, you might have found that out through looking through the parliamentary records, but my whānau and I have a couple of rentals, some of which were owned by our parents that we've inherited through the responsibilities that we have as children to our parents.
Will those rentals will you drop the rents of those? You know, how will you help the downward pressure of the rental as a landlord?
Yeah, I think that's probably a private matter for my wife and I, but what I will say is we've tried to maintain it at an affordable level.
Tēnā koe.
Ngā mihi ki a koe.
Kia mihi nui ki a koe hoki. Kāti, kua koe anō te mata i te hoanga kōrero. Ka nui te mihi ki te Māngai Pāho me irirangi te motu. We'll be back in a fortnight. Nohoro mai.